Okay, welcome back to the second part of this presentation. So let me bring up the PowerPoint slides so that we can all see them. And I'll put it on full screen mode. So this is the second half of the presentation where we're talking about values and principles that exist behind the Code of Conduct. And in this segment, we're going to be talking about things like conflicts, like ethical dilemmas, and also discussing some of those case studies that I mentioned in the first part. So conflicts of interest, I may have mentioned this in the first part of the presentation, but there's a very extensive piece in the Code of Conduct dealing with conflicts. Let me try to simplify it in a way that I think people can sort of easily grasp the concept. A conflict of interest may arise at any moment in which our roles as county employees intersect with some other role that we have in our lives, because we have lots of other roles in our lives other than just being county employees. We are family members, we are neighbors, et cetera, et cetera. So let me just give you a quick example, because many times I think people confuse the idea of conflicts of interest as being somewhat solely in the realm of awarding contracts. But there was a circumstance when I first started working for the county where I was contacted by a director who told me that they had just completed doing an interview process, hiring for a position in their office. And it turns out that one of the people that they placed on the interview panel was the fiance of one of the applicants. Well, I think we can all see that is a clear conflict of interest, because here you have an individual who's in a decision-making role for the county, but also has an additional personal interest in the outcome. So my recommendation in that situation was that they reform the panel, that they take the fiance off of the panel, they recall the applicants, re-interview, rescore, and make the hiring decision based upon that. And I said that for a couple of different reasons. One is that we have to ensure that we maintain the integrity of our decision-making process. But secondly, because virtually every decision-making that we go through has some form of documentation behind it, we need, and that documentation is subject to inspection by any member of the public because we are a government agency. So it is not an uncommon occurrence that we may have an unsuccessful applicant or bidder or proponent on a contract requesting to see the credentials, the proposals, the score sheets of the successful applicant, looking for potentially anything that would draw into question the integrity of that decision-making process and could possibly cause us to have to do things all over again. So we need to believe that conflicts exist. We need to understand that there are policies and rules that exist to prevent these conflicts from occurring. And so we need to maintain these degrees of separation between our personal lives and our professional lives as county employees. And there is a provision in the Code of Conduct that talks about if you think you are or may be potentially getting into a situation that could create a conflict, you should contact our office or the county manager's office so that we can do the analysis and help guide you through so that you don't wind up being in that sort of a situation. There are unavoidable ethical dilemmas that are going to occur in our professional lives as county employees. Most of these can be anticipated, and when we can anticipate them, then we can take the steps necessary to prepare for them and make the best decisions possible. We need to take the time to work through what are the rules, what are the policies that are going to apply here, but not only that, what is the best practice? Because when we do these things, when we anticipate problems or dilemmas, perhaps based on experience, and we know how to deal with them in advance, this takes us closer and closer and develops greater levels of wisdom. So our first case study comes out of California, and this involved the fire chief for Manhattan Beach. And the city manager dismissed their fire chief over some comments that he had made at a meeting of regional public safety officials. And the comments he made were this. He said, "Pardon my vernacular, I think our foot needs to be clearly on their throat, and they need to feel it, and they need to feel that constant pressure every single day that we mean business. Now, the context in which he said this was referring to negotiations with a vendor, but her statements had been recorded, and these statements were made right on the heels of the death of George Floyd in Minneapolis, and these types of comments were deemed unacceptable by the city manager and by the city as an organization. And in fact, the city manager, in explaining the fire chief's dismissal, said, "We need thoughtful leaders offering voices that are open and inclusive." And Chief Drum's recent comments do not reflect our core values as a city, and an immediate change of fire department leadership is in the community's best interests. We live in a world where words matter. And again, the public is paying particular attention to the things we say, the decisions we make, the actions that we take. And we need to understand that offhand or inappropriate comments like this may lead to very severe and very immediate consequences. So there will come times where we find ourselves in these unavoidable dilemmas. And it will be situations where it may be difficult to know the right thing to do. And we will have competing obligations, let's say obligations to an immediate supervisor, obligations to a DCM, obligations perhaps to an elected official. And we need to sort those out. We need to sort out what those obligations are. And we may even be confronted with a circumstance where we're given essentially a bad outcome no matter what choice we make. And in those instances, again, we need to analyze them. We need to take the time. We need to figure out, okay, what are my obligations? What does the policy say? What does the law say? And if I'm given these two bad outcomes, which one is going to do the least amount of harm to the stakeholders or the people that are going to be impacted by this decision? And consider all sorts of special or intervening circumstances. But each time one of these things happen, again, it gives us an opportunity to reflect or debrief after the situation to see what we could do better. Do we need to put new process or policy in place to try to avoid a recurrence of these types of situations? So how do we make ethical decisions? Emerson once said that a man is what he thinks about all day long. You can, of course, modernize that to say a person is what he thinks about all day long. And I think this is true. I think that people's behaviors tend to reflect those things that they think about, that they obsess about, that they may believe in about themselves or about a particular system. So if it is about both outcomes and ethics, if it is about both personal well-being and the well-being of others, if it's about how they should make what they do matter, then these are the instincts of becoming a leader. Our second example comes from Detroit, where the Detroit Fire Department is being sued over an incident that occurred on New Year's Eve by a property owner whose building had caught on fire. And the basis of the lawsuit was that the fire department was negligent in fighting the fire, and the evidence of this was found in a photo that had become viral on social media that showed a group of firefighters posing in front of the blazing structure. Now, at the time, the building was under construction, and the fire officials indicated that the fire was too dangerous for personnel to enter. Now, that may well be the case, but the problem here was the appearance or the perception that this photo conveyed that, again, the firefighters either just didn't care or they were taking the time to pose rather than perhaps doing other things that they could have done in preparation for extinguishing the fire. And the individuals involved were disciplined. But nevertheless, this has generated a lawsuit, and it just goes again to the point that these things that we do that create these public perceptions can become just as important as whatever the technical rules or SOPs may be. So how do people make ethical decisions? Well, on this slide, I give you several different ways, not all of which I would recommend. Some people may make their ethical decisions based purely on self-interest. In other words, what's good for them. And I'm sure we've all encountered people like that in our lives, where every decision they made was what was going to benefit them the most, without regard to the impact or the consequences it may have on other people. Some people make their decisions based upon a code, and we've been talking about the county's code of conduct today, but there are other codes by which we may live our lives, whether they're dictated by family, our religion, culture, what have you. But we need to understand that when we are in our mode as county employees, we need to be aware of our duties and obligations under the county's code of conduct, even if those may conflict with some of these other codes that are defined by these other roles we have in our lives. I think role models are a great idea. And even for departments or offices that may not have a formal mentorship program, we need to be acting as mentors and leaders for those around us, which is why I say we all have a leadership role to play, especially when it comes to ethics. And I emphasize this again because of what I mentioned in the first part about there's going to be a whole new generation of employees coming to the county over the next couple of years. And so we need to be setting the standard now for those future generations. And then there are people who may never ask the ethical question at all. Those people who block all moral considerations, who may act purely on impulse. And this is not necessarily out of self-interest. This is being purely reactive with no regard to the consequences to themselves and other people. Our next example comes from Polk County, and this involved the family of a man who was killed in a house fire in 2017. Again, another lawsuit is generated against the fire department and a former captain. And what occurred was there was a fire that claimed the life of a 78-year-old male. 6 other people who were in the building were able to escape. And so the family of the deceased is suing the county and the former captain, claiming, again, that they were negligent in their efforts. And so what is the basis for this one? Well, it's similar to the one we just discussed coming out of Detroit, where the captain who actually resigned prior to the lawsuit being filed was initially involved in another incident where someone lost their life, and the person who lost their life was on a call with the dispatchers for approximately 20 minutes, including up to the point she lost consciousness. But in the October 2017 incident, the captain was suspended for sending a Snapchat video from the scene. Now, it's not clear whether the Snapchat was sent during the time this individual was fighting for their life or later, but nevertheless, that is probably going to be deemed inappropriate and is going to be strong, compelling evidence in this negligence lawsuit. So how should we approach making these decisions? And my emphasis here again is we really do need to take the time to think through these problems, to consult, to collaborate, whether it be with my office or with other people, say within the chain of command, because we need to be aware that we may have these competing obligations and roles in our lives. And we need to know the standards and the codes and the rules contained within our code of conduct, our administrative instructions, SOPs, and the like, and really take the time to think through these tough decisions. And I emphasize, again, ethics is a team sport, and you need to discuss these questions, whether it be with my office or with someone else that you consider to be moral, someone you respect, and someone who you want to respect you in your decisions, in your actions. And this is all getting to the point about taking the time rather than merely being reactive to whatever pressure is currently in front of you. I want to spend a couple of moments talking about this concept of intrinsic motivation. Intrinsic, just something that is intrinsic is something that is essentially a drive within you to do something basically on its own, as opposed to doing something because of some sort of outside incentive, whether that be punishment or reward. So psychologists tend to agree that these outside incentives do not work as well as someone who has an intrinsic motivation to do something. So if you're only acting in a way to either avoid punishment or gain some sort of award, that's not going to be a long-lasting motivator. Our next incident or case study comes from Los Angeles, where we have a situation involving a probationary firefighter who claims he was hazed and harassed by fellow firefighters, that's difficult to say, to the point of seeking help from a psychologist. And he ultimately files suit against the Los Angeles Fire Department, claiming disability, discrimination, and retaliation. The individual in this case claimed that the harassment and the hazing had become so severe that he was disrupting his sleep. He was constantly being harassed at work. He dreaded going to work because of the harassment, and he felt as though he was being treated like that every day, and everyone was telling him he should quit. And some of these fears that developed in him included things like feeling as though he was being trapped in a burning building and no one would come and save him. And he made his superiors aware of the situation. But the harassment continued, even after he had been transferred to another station. And ultimately, he was terminated, but his complaint is claiming that the department failed to take into consideration his particular circumstances, his disability, and the actions of those around him that led to the problems, the psychological trauma that he was suffering. And so this is an interesting type of claim that can arise where if behaviors like hazing, like harassment, go unchecked by leadership within a department or within an organization, they can spiral into these types of claims for psychological and physical abuse. And these need to be taken very, very seriously. As well, this is a publicized incident that reflects poorly upon the reputation of the department. So back to intrinsic motivation just for a second. The reason why extrinsic motivators are less effective is that, again, they tend not to have these long-lasting effects, but when they remind us of our intrinsic values, they can become a powerful force. So, quick example, from our personal lives, we may say that good health is necessary to spend more time with our children, so that reminds us of an intrinsic principle. Professional example may be showing up to work on time. And you should do this not because you want to avoid either being fired or just because your boss told you to do so, but you do it because of an intrinsic motivation or principle to remain not only gainfully employed, but also to establish and maintain that positive working relationship. So you're doing it not just because you don't want to get in trouble, you're doing it because you have an intrinsic motivation to do the right thing, essentially. So when we can match these external motivating factors with something that will become a driving force internally, I think it puts us in a better place, and it places us in a position to make better ethical decisions. So when we try to convince someone to do something, we should try to move closer to those intrinsic sources. We should appeal to the intrinsic motivations And these are often more effective than just a random incentive, just offering a carrot rather than really having the person develop a passion for what they do is less effective. So don't just say to someone, for example, they need to work harder, but that the time spent at work is valued and will yield even greater success. So we provide better service to the public, to ourselves, to our coworkers, when we give clear and concise instructions that create or generate these intrinsic motivations rather than just being driven by a paycheck or the time clock and the like. So departments may become unfocused for a variety of reasons. And again, we may be in a period of time right now, given the pandemic and the changed circumstances, where departments may need to refocus. They may need to look to what's going on. Are there goals and rules and responsibilities that may need to be examined and reset, or put in a different light? Maybe what we were planning pre-pandemic was too ambitious. And in the fire department, of course, your mission doesn't change a whole lot, but some of your priorities may have to be readjusted accordingly. We need to hear each other. We need to, and especially with our leaders, they need to be willing to mediate. And inevitably, there will be conflicts that occur within a work environment, and they should try to use those mediating skills to diffuse and to heal and to build bridges. We need to both hear and listen. And by this, I mean active listening. Many times when we are listening to someone, we're not truly listening to them. We're simply thinking about how we're going to respond to what they are saying. So we may be listening, but we may not be hearing what they're saying. We may not be taking into consideration the context, the tone, the inflection of the person who's speaking to us. We need to acknowledge and build on the individual strengths that we have within a department and within the individuals, and then document, especially now where lots of different programs have been put into place in response to the pandemic. All of our efforts with regards to this need to be documented, whether it be because we are getting grant money or we may be subject to audit. We need to make sure that everything that we're doing, especially all of these new projects and goals, that we have sufficient justification and documentation to justify the decisions that were made, especially when it involves the outlaying of cash. So I'm going to, in these final few slides, just talk a little bit more about the formal processes that we have in my office and about the Code of Conduct Review Board. This slide here represents sort of an evolution of my office. When I started with the county a little more than 7 years ago, and we began building the compliance office, we dealt primarily with formal complaints. These are signed and sworn complaints that are heard by the Code of Conduct Review Board, and I'll have more to say about them in a moment. But we also now receive more what I would consider to be anonymous or informal complaints. These anonymous complaints can be either from the public or from an employee who doesn't want to file a formal complaint, but nevertheless is wanting to point out what they believe to be inappropriate conduct by a county employee. And many times, this is, again, it's just something that is observed. Let's say a member of the public may see someone driving a county vehicle and they think they may have broken or violated some traffic laws. Those may get reported to us. Again, they don't go to the Conduct Review Board, but what we will do is we will do a little bit of background research, find out who the vehicle, or at least what department the vehicle was assigned to, then forward the complaint or the concern to that department saying, here you go, we've received this, please do whatever appropriate investigation is necessary and take whatever corrective action is necessary. And then the informal process is the one by which people can simply come to our office with questions, with concerns, to start the conversation. As I mentioned at the beginning, our office is an independent, neutral, nonpartisan office. So we are here to be a resource for all county employees. And this doesn't necessarily have to be something that necessarily involves a code of conduct violation. This could be simply a question about, I don't know where to go with this. I've had a few of those recently that I've had to refer people to HR or other departments. When I first came to work here, I got a phone call from a former county employee who called us up and said that he didn't think that he had been paid for all of his accumulated vacation time. And so he said, well, that's something that, we can check out through payroll. And we checked it out, and it turns out that he hadn't been paid. There was a glitch in the system. So the simple resolution to that was to get him paid. We don't have to have a grievance or a complaint or a lawsuit for things that are easily resolvable at the lowest possible level. The next thing I want to talk about is this advisory opinion. Now, one of the things that the Code of Conduct Review Board does, in addition to hearing complaints, is they also issue advisory opinions. Now, I just want to spend a moment on this because you should all be aware that there is a gift rule that is contained within our Code of Conduct, and this advisory opinion took a very unique circumstance and applying the gift rule. So the situation was this, that the Albuquerque Hispano Chamber of Commerce wanted to offer complimentary tickets to certain elected officials and county employees. Now, just as background, the simple way to put the gift rule that exists in the Code of Conduct is that no county employee, elected official, what have you, may receive more than $100 in gifts in a calendar year from a restricted donor. Restricted donors are those people that we do business with or who want to do business with us, people that we regulate, or people who are looking for a governmental decision. This could be someone seeking a permit, a developer, a lobbyist, etc. So in this circumstance, that made it sort of unique was, first of all, the value of the tickets did exceed the $100 gift limit. And the Hispano Chamber of Commerce in the past had been or had a contract with the county. So in the past, when this issue had arisen, we had said, no, we think this would be a violation of the gift rule. But in 2016, when this question was asked, they did not have a contract with the county. So the board took up this question, they analyzed it, and they said, well, since you are not currently in a financial relationship with the county, we do not think you are a restricted donor, and therefore the elected officials and county employees could accept these complimentary tickets. But it made the board sort of ponder whether or not there ought to be something of a cooling off period, by which I mean, should there be a period of time when someone who gives a gift that is in excess of the $100 limit, should they be limited in terms of how long or how soon they can get a new contract? It's not expressed in the code, but nevertheless, it's a new sort of wrinkle or consideration. Now, having gone through all of this, I want, again, to emphasize this rule exists, it applies to all county employees, and please, if you find yourself in a circumstance where you think the gift rule might be implicated, contact our office. We will help guide you through it. We have outside counsel that we can also consult with. We would much rather you ask the question rather than just accepting something and then realizing it may have been, in fact, a violation of this rule. So a bit about the Code of Conduct Review Board. This is an all-volunteer board appointed by each one of the commission districts. These are not contractors or employees. These are just members of the community that have no financial ties to the county. They serve 2-year terms. They have a chair and a vice chair. And as I mentioned, they have outside counsel, Bob White, who is a former city attorney and also a member of the city council and a very well-respected member of the bar. Now, I want to make something clear here. The complaints that the Code of Conduct Review Board hears are those complaints that are filed against elected officials, candidates for county office, at-will employees, and volunteers. Now, the code does apply to everyone. So for those other categories of employees, either our classified employees or our union employees, you can still be disciplined for violating the code of conduct. In fact, I'm seeing more and more disciplinary actions taken where they're being cited for violating not only the code, but maybe other policies, and violating those provisions we talked about at the beginning, dealing with respect, public confidence, acting in a manner that is appropriate, use of county resources, and the like. But the disciplinary process for those types of employees go through either the disciplinary process in the personnel rules or the process in the collective bargaining agreement. So yes, everyone can be disciplined for it, but the disciplinary process is determined by your classification as a county employee. And so I just want to make that clear to people that there are not separate processes. There's only a singular process based upon your classification. So this is, I believe, the second to last slide, and it's just to emphasize the fact that we do work for the public. We are a public agency, so we need to be mindful of our behavior, and that when we have these levels of transparency in an ethical culture, that is going to save us time, money, and reputation. And I hope that those case studies that we talked about through this second part of the presentation emphasize how easy it is to lose the public's trust and impact the county's reputation in a negative way by doing those things that are, I think we can all agree, simply inappropriate. So with that, this is the final slide. It just shows some of the other things that our office does. And again, the bottom there, the contact information, compliance@burnco.gov. You can always reach us there. So with that, I want to thank everyone for your attention, your time, and note again that you will receive credit for attending both parts of this training. We go on a 2-year cycle. We're a little bit past the halfway point of our current reporting cycle. So the next time you'll be up for getting code of conduct training is going to be beginning of July of next year. And again, you have 2 years to get the training again. So with that, I will conclude. And if any of you have questions or concerns about anything that I've discussed today, please don't hesitate to contact our office.